John 6:45. Est scriptum in prophetis, et erunt omnes docibiles Dei, omnes qui audivit a patre et didicit venit ad me. It is written in the prophets, and all shall be taught of God. Everyone who has heard and has learned from the Father comes to me. Here in this verse, as I have indicated, we have a quotation from the Old Testament. Again, it's not totally apparent just from the text itself, so we've got to add in some punctuation to help ourselves out here. There's a couple of interesting features. One is this vocabulary item, docibiles, which is an adjective, docibilis, literally teachable, apt to learn, something like that, ready to learn, being used here substantively, that is as a noun unto itself. Of course, it's an adjective, but an adjective that's not modified in its immediate neighborhood by a noun can sometimes function itself as a noun. Teachables, literally, which is to say teachable people. It might help you, though, because of this peculiar construction here with Dei, which is genitive singular, to think of docibiles here as the equivalent of discipuli. Now, discipuli is a noun from a related verb. Docibiles comes from doceo, teach. Discipuli comes from disco, learn, which is the verb that we also have here. We'll talk about that in a moment. So it is more or less equivalent. Learners are also people who are taught or who can be taught. So if we imagine that this is discipuli Dei, it makes a little more sense according to typical Latin syntax. Our quotation then would say, and they shall all be learners of God. That is, students or disciples of God, let's say. And again, all of this is written in the prophets. That part is easy enough to understand. So the use of the genitive in this kind of scenario is quite unorthodox by normal Latin standards. But here, as so often, our translator is very precisely imitating the Greek, which accounts for this construction. It's more or less the same construction in Greek. It seems to me that it's a little bit more idiomatic in Greek. It's, I think, not at all really idiomatic in Latin. But again, it's very precise according to the standard of the underlying Greek text. And I don't think any native Latin speaker probably would have had difficulty understanding it, although it would have sounded, I think, probably a little bit strange, a little bit uncouth, or perhaps foreign. And that's just the sort of complaint, as we mentioned before, that we find in the writings of Augustine and Jerome and some others who say, yeah, when they first encountered as educated, literarily accomplished Romans, when they first encountered the Latin scriptures, they found them sort of puzzling and the style very strange, and for Augustine at least initially very off-putting, probably because of phrases like this in part. But as I said, we can understand it fairly easily if we think about it for a moment. So they will all be disciples or learners of God, that is taught by God. And our quotation ends right there. And this is Jesus speaking again. Everyone, omnis, every person, and that's another substantive right there. Everyone who, and we've got two key verbs here, audivit and didicit. Audivit from audio, fourth conjugation verb. Didicit from disco, third conjugation verb. The third principal part of disco, by the way, is didiki. So this is our third person singular, perfect active indicative. Of course, exactly the same thing we have with audivit. Now, one important potential stumbling block here is you might ask yourself, should I take a patre with audivit or didicit? And the answer is both. Take it with both. That's what we do in English when we translate this verse. We move a patre simply to the end of the phrase and say, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. That is Jesus the Messiah.